So this is a question I think about all the time. I'm a small business owner. I own a small distillery in Dan's part of the neighborhood. So what if government was entrepreneurial, right? These are two words that don't typically go together, ever. But I think this is a question that no matter how big or how small your municipality is, we should be asking ourselves, right? And I think if we want to create entrepreneurial places, we should expect government to be entrepreneurial. What a concept, right? So I want to share a story I think provides some great lessons for y'all to take home. So when Mayor Duggan was elected in January 2014, he came to us at the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. He says, I want two things. I want to build Detroit's brand as the entrepreneurial capital of the world, and I want a business competition to do it. So here's $4.5 million of CDBG, federal funding, go figure it out. So as a small business owner who took far longer than 110 days to get my CFO, I'm thinking, a business competition run by the government with federal funds? I was skeptical. Okay, but I'm here to tell you, I think we actually figured it out. So I want to tell you about Motor City Match. Okay. So this has been a great program that has really, I think, set a standard for what happens when government, small business service providers, foundation, everyone kind of rally together around kind of a common process. So for us, it's really about building this pipeline and the process to run it. Okay, so that's really what I'm going to talk about here. So if you're opening a business in Detroit, you face two problems. First is finding space, right? So there's tons of vacant space in Detroit, right? Well, there's a lot of vacant space with a lot of problems that require a tremendous amount of money to fix up. So the second point, if you're a small business, right, it's hard enough to get the capital to just start your business. Now you have to raise the capital to fix up somebody else's building, right? So if you're an apparel boutique, now you have to figure out how to be a construction company. You don't have enough money as it is. So all this risk and uncertainty keeps all this small business lending on the pipeline, right? And we have this incredible entrepreneurial demand that far exceeds the supply of move-in ready space. And we have Entrepreneur Color Fund, we have an incredible foundation community, incredible CFI community, but the risks and uncertainty is too much. So how do we create a business competition to open up the process and put money into action to try to solve some of this? So this is our solution. Match the best businesses in Detroit and around the world with our best vacant real estate, provide $500,000 in grants to help fill the gap, and do this every single quarter. Right? So this is a business competition we run on a quarterly basis, which can be a little inhumane at times, but I think has been incredibly beneficial. So this is our basic approach, right? How do you get a business from idea to open? So we have 4 different award tracks. I just want to tell you real quick how it works. So first track, you got a good idea. First thing you need to do, put it on paper, business plan. So the goal here, obviously is to build the pipeline, but it's also to build a culture. And you heard Ari say it a little bit. This openness is really important. So in Detroit, if you have an idea, the city of Detroit government will invest in your idea. We're talking $250 to $500 to send you to business planning class for 8 weeks. But if you have an idea, the city will actually invest in it. And I think that's a really important thing. This is just as important as the $500,000 in grants every quarter, in my opinion. Right? So send 50 folks to business planning class every quarter. Next, you got a good business plan, you need to find a space. Right? So we do matchmaking, top 25 businesses, top 25 spaces. Okay? Obvious goal is to fill vacant space, but it's a lot more than that. It's about information. So we have 180 spaces that we've found through this process, right? Nobody knew where these spaces were. None of them were listed online. There's no brokers listing these spaces. We didn't know who owned them, contact information, none of that. And they also had no idea about this incredible army of entrepreneurs that are right in the neighborhoods who've been walking by every day thinking about, I would love to open something there. So it's just connecting 2 networks. We tried bus tours and open houses and surveys. Last time we were just like, screw it, let's just get everybody in the same room and let chaos ensue. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was 4 hours. It was so easy, right? These are entrepreneurial solutions. Just get everybody in the same place and let them figure it out. Okay, so you found yourself a space, but now you found yourself with a renovation project, right? So here we hire 7 architects. We hire architects for 7 of the best but hardest to figure out projects. We deliver a set of construction documents. Helen Broughton, who's on our team, who used to be the business advocate with the city of Detroit, helps you fast-track permits. So we're trying this case management approach live in real time. Okay, so, right, you got a good idea, great business plan, great location. You know what it's going to take to do this renovation project. You know how much it's going to cost. But as most small businesses, you don't have enough money to do it, right? So this is where the $500,000 in grants come in. However, that's not the best part of the program. The best part of the program is we have 6 CDFI partners who collaboratively do about $1.5 to $4 million in lending every quarter with 1 loan application. 6 lenders, 1 loan application. Just easy things to do. But we all sit around the table and we figure out how to responsibly invest this money into small businesses. We help vet deals together, right? So we've taken businesses from idea to open, but here's the kind of secret sauce, right? So you have all these pre-development activities that you need before you start investing in your business. And they all cost money. Architects, lawyers to negotiate your lease. If you don't have enough money as it is, you're going to skip that process. And you're going to get yourself in a bad lease. You're going to take 2 years to get your construction drawings through the city because they were wrong because you didn't hire an architect the first 6 months. And you went over budget. And now, all that working capital that you saved is by the wayside. That is my business, actually. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, no, I learned the hard way, right? So this is based off of my experience. And yes, Dan is absolutely correct. We did blow our money on going through the permitting process. But, if we actually would have had this, it wouldn't have happened. Right, so we use the right money at the right time. So you have federal block grant dollars paying for the TA up front to get these entrepreneurs ready for money. At the back end, we've leveraged all that federal funding to leverage private dollars both in the foundation community and the CDFI community. Right, so now we have entrepreneurs who are ready to invest. And I want to show you a little bit what it looks like. We've been through 3 rounds. Okay, we've had 2,000 applications. We served almost 300 businesses, gotten 180 spaces online that nobody knew about before. You can go online and look at them right now. 3 rounds, $500,000 a piece, $1.5 million. We've leveraged $10.5 million total investment. Thank you. I'll show you what it looks like in a sec, but it looks like Detroit. And Freddie said this, about the importance of setting the metrics on the front end. So we have hit our metrics perfectly. So we set it at 70% minority-owned business, 50% minority women-owned, and 2/3 Detroiters. And we have almost consistently hit that every single time. So I'm going to show you here what it looks like as I give you a few takeaway comments. So building the pipeline and the process to run it, right? A lot of us who do economic development, we're going out trying to find all these entrepreneurs. We built this competition platform that let everybody come to us, right? We use technology where we have probably about 90 jurors who help us vote on this. They're all members of the community. They're members of the lending community. We're able to share all this, right? We created this platform where, we had the vision from the government. We made the investment in block grant dollars that then we were able to leverage foundation resources and CDFI resources in a responsible way because we were using the federal money to help businesses at the highest risk stage of their business. So, when you think about this, it was kind of like a build it and they will come sort of situation. So, no matter how large or how small, this can be scaled. Everybody's got vacant real estate. Everybody's got block grant dollars. There's resources at play that you can take to translate into real opportunity in this neighborhood. And it's part of the culture now. I get in an Uber, and the guy is telling me about this program, Motor City Match, that he's going to start a business in. And then I get a call from my other buddy who works for NEI. He's like, hey, did you tell this guy about Motor City Match? Because I'm in an Uber right now, and he's telling me about it. And then we talk about any ideas, right? So there's this whole culture of small business services and resources here, and this was a really great way to kind of bring them together and leverage it in a way that, you know, makes sense, and you see what the impact looks like, right? So this is in every corner of the city. So with that, I hope that helps. I'm happy to talk about it more, and with that, I'll turn it over to Teresa. Thank you.
So my charge today is to tell you what Detroit means for national urban economic development. And rather than bury the lead, we just put it right on the cover, right on the cover slide, which is that city-centered, city-led economic development can work. So when we think of the last, say, 20 years of the field, there's been this real shift towards thinking in terms of regions, right? Thinking in terms of regional economies, thinking in terms of regional plans, thinking in terms of regional actors. And there are lots of good reasons for that, and I'll talk about some of those. But I think that what Detroit requires us to do is to recalibrate whether or not that was the way to think about it, or whether that's the way to always think about it. And certainly when we think about the successes in Detroit, we have to open up the possibility that maybe this needs to be reframed. And so really, I think the audience, when I think about who I'm talking to here, you know, talking to everyone, but talking specifically to the cities who themselves find themselves kind of mired in these kind of stagnant economies. You know, for all we hear about the Boston and the San Franciscos and the New Yorks, urban economies across the country actually aren't doing that well. They're doing a little better than the rest of the national economy, but certainly half of our cities or something have no way forward that they can see. They've had decades of decline economically. And so I'm really talking to the cities in the room who are thinking, what's our next step and how should we think about this? And so want to talk about maybe broadly how you should think about this. And so the first question and the first claim is that, you know, Detroit's strategy worked. Detroit was very city-centered strategy. Rip Rapson's here. This was not an obvious choice. Rip will tell you when he said, look, we're going to rebuild Detroit around Detroit actors, around the Detroit economy. He got a lot of pushback, and people said, you're crazy, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to create these regional coalitions, these regional plans. And Rip said, no, I'm going with the city, and he doubled down on that. During the Detroit Future City process, Tony got a lot of pressure in this regard. You know, why is this not a regional plan? Why are we not incorporating, you know, the major regional actors? Why are we not coming up, you know, bringing the counties into the economic development strategy? And again, she kind of stood firm and doubled down. And the numbers actually are pretty stunning. So these are the Detroit job growth numbers. And so on the left, that's just the trajectory, just kind of the line graph of the quarterly job growth in Detroit since 2000. And what we can see is there was this inflection point. It was the national inflection point coming out of the recession. About 16,000 jobs in that period on the left, private sector jobs. And so if we look to the right, so what we did is we went back and we compared this to what the predictions about Detroit had been made in the last regional economic, they put out these 30-year forecasts, and they put out one, I think it was probably around 2008. Their prediction was that Detroit would add 9,000 jobs between 2010 and 2015. There would be a bump up in the national economy. That Detroit City would feel some of this, but that over the next 25 years, they would actually dribble out even those jobs. And so the prediction from the regional planning group was that over a 30-year period, Detroit would add 7,000 net new jobs. In other words, and we calculated, it was something like 2% of what they had predicted the regional total to be. So the regional economy will grow, none of it will end up in Detroit. And what we've seen instead is that in 4 years, Detroit has added 16,000 jobs. Detroit has the urban economy, the city economy. Look, every job is hard to get in Detroit. Every job is hard to get everywhere. No one, you know, this is not the end of the story, but no one thinks that Detroit is going to lose 10,000 jobs, right? This 16,000 is real and it's going to grow. And so fundamentally, Detroit has changed the story about its role in the regional economy. And it did it using a city-centered strategy. So when we think about, for the cities out there who are thinking about how you go forward, you will have to, you know, you'll get a lot of pressure to create a regional strategy with the idea that we'll grow the whole region and your city will come along with it. Okay, and so when we break this down, what are the differences between these kind of city-focused strategies and these regional strategies? The first difference, of course, is geography. What are you focusing on? What are you measuring? What are you trying to grow? In the city-centered strategies, of course, like you're trying to grow the city economy. You certainly wish your suburbs well. You wish the rest of the region well. You recognize that sometimes to grow your city economy, you need strong collaboration in certain sectors or certain assets with the rest of the regional economy. But you decide that your job is to grow your city's economy. You don't decide that your job is to grow the region's economy and hope that some of it spills over. And so geography is a big difference. So why, even if the regional approaches have been correct up until this point, and I actually just don't really even have an opinion on it. All right, I have an opinion on it. Why now might there be kind of a new moment? And one of the constant challenges with the regional approaches is that cities and their regions often have different specializations. And so you measure a regional economy, and you assume that if these are the 5 major clusters, these are the 5 major growth paths for your region, that these are the same ones for your city. In fact, there are cases where that's extraordinarily true. We've looked at cities and regions and said, like, wow, their major clusters all align. But it's actually not always the case, and I would say it's probably more often not the case. But more importantly, I think it's becoming less of the case, in the sense that urban economies are becoming so specialized. The land use patterns that we see in urban economies are so different than what we see in suburban economies that I think you're really seeing this kind of bifurcation of the types of economic activity that go on in central cities versus the rest of the region. And so it's probably even more important to think about your city itself. The other is that the new economy, I think, just works fundamentally different. And I think that a lot of our old models are based on the physical economy. And so when you think about something like automotives, you think about metals, things where you're moving things physically. Now, certainly physical things travel, cross oceans, and there's a lot of trade. But certainly when we think about the models of these kind of larger regional economies and movements between, this OEM here and this supplier here and this design firm here, a lot of it has to do with the physical economy. When we look at how the digital economy works, when we look at how really specialized scientific economies work, it seems that we see this pattern of kind of hyper-localization. And so that the people you really do work with are not the guy in the county next to you. It's the men and women within your district, within your building. And we're seeing this kind of hyper-localization, I think, of our key clusters, which is why we're seeing these huge real estate spikes in places like Kendall Square in Cambridge. And so I think the new economy, and I think the linkages that those people have with the rest of the economy are often colleagues that they've had for 20 years and they pick up the phone. Or it's a research arm in France. It's not necessarily someone or some company in the suburbs. And so I think we're just seeing kind of a fundamental kind of change in geography that really, again, kind of points to doing these city-centered strategies. And then finally, the best part about regional strategies is that they're agnostic in terms of where jobs go, right? And so they say, look, our job is to grow the regional economy, all jobs are good, great. So we're spatially agnostic. The bad thing about these strategies is that they're spatially agnostic. And so when we think about the fiscal pressures that cities are under, and you tell a city, what we want you to do is have an economic development strategy that is agnostic as to whether jobs end up in your city or somewhere else, cities should not be buying that. Right? That's a terrible way to go. And when we look at cities like Detroit that have income taxes, it's really, if you're a city with an income tax, your one strategy should be landing jobs, not stealing jobs from the suburbs. That's not going to work, first of all. You're probably not doing the same things. This is not, the regionalist call towards collaboration, towards not stealing jobs, absolutely central to how we think about this. But that's not what we're talking about here. And so then I'm going to go quickly through some of the other differences in these strategies. But a lot of it is how the strategy is organized. And Detroit Future City is a great example of this. And great to hear Anita talk about it. Great to hear Tony talk about it. But a lot of these kind of city-centered strategies often look towards political and civic leadership. In Detroit Future City, this was the exact case of it, right? The mayor's office was central to both the strategy, and then when we look at the economy and some of the Motor City Match and some of the great kind of innovations that have gone on in Detroit, the mayor's office plays a big role. The city government plays a big role, and the neighborhood groups play a big role. It's backed up by formal power, right? These are elected officials who have the right to say, we're going to use federal grants for this. We're going to deal with our vacant land like this. We're going to look at zoning that looks like this. And so there's a kind of formal power behind it. When we look at regional strategies, it's often about business leadership. It's often run by business leadership. The sources of power are informal. And of course, it's appointed rather than elected. Those aren't bad things, but I think they matter in terms of how we think about this going forward. And so I think when we think, one of the differences with city-centered strategies, they do actually have this kind of legitimacy, if you're a city. These kind of politically centered strategies. They have a legitimacy because people get elected, and people actually are accountable for when Mayor Duggan says, if the economy doesn't look like this, don't vote for me, right? There's a way to kind of respond to and kind of voice your pleasure or displeasure with what has gone on. I think the other reason we might want to rethink this is maybe we're entering an era of good governance. Maybe, and one of the reasons the regionalists, I think, look to the region to lift up the urban center and lift up urban economies is because urban governance was so bad for so long, right? And so it wasn't something you didn't necessarily have city governments that you believed in or that had kind of the competence to do some of the things that we've seen Detroit do. And so, but if we're entering a place where we can have more trust in urban governance, I think it makes us rethink these kind of city versus regional strategies. And then the implementation and the tools are different, right? If you're a city, policy is one of your tools, regulation is your tool, you allocate resources, right? Every year you decide what are our budgets going to be, you control budgets, you decide where you're going to invest. And at the end of the day, implementation is about fiat, right? You have a right to say, we're going to do this, you can't do this, right? These are legal structures. When we think about the tools of regional strategies, a lot of it's about advocacy, which is great. It's great to have the business community say, look, you know, the workforce system needs to be overhauled. It needs to look like this. We're going to talk to our county leaders, our city leaders about, you know, changing the way X works or the way Y works. There also can be, it's also an important, with these regional business-led strategies, that there's alignment, right? That business leaders can align their actions with each other's and then also kind of align their actions with the outcomes they're trying to get. One of the great things about regional strategies is asset building, right? They don't necessarily control resources, but there are ways to think about how to use these strategies and these organizations to build assets. And at the end of the day, it's not about fiat, it's about volunteerism. Like, you know, whether organizations that come up with these strategies, implement these strategies, they do it on a voluntary basis. This, I think, in some ways has been one of the issues with it. So why might city strategies kind of be better going forward? I think there are two, and I'm going to start with the second one. One is the track record of volunteerism. We just see these regional initiatives, these, you know, business, public, private. We just see them often. It's very hard. You're asking people to do a second job, and it often just doesn't hold. So when we look at cluster strategies, economic cluster strategies, this has been the organizing principle in urban economic development now for almost 20 years. How many successful cluster organizations are there across the US? Are there 20? There aren't 1,000, right? And it's just very hard to get people to come together on a voluntary basis, commit long term, and then, you know, as someone, we were talking about this in Boston last week because the new small business plan wants more organization around clusters because it's much easier to get good results, just put it that way. And someone in the conversation just said, you know, I've seen so many of these groups start, and they last for a few months, and then you never hear from them again. And in fact, it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think we were probably too optimistic thinking that we could have these kind of regional, business-led, volunteeristic organizations around for the long haul, really changing the economy. And then the second piece I think reason we need to think about really focusing on city-led strategies, is the importance of the built environment. Right? What people want now is they want transit, and they want clean streets, and they want retail corridors. They respond to a physical environment. For the types of businesses that go into downtowns, this is a demand now. These are the sorts of things that unelected regional officials, business people, they really have no say over this. At the end of the day, we need governments, and urban governments, to do a lot of that work to build their economies. So now, interestingly, I've put my thumb on the scale for city-centered strategies because I do believe in them, and I do think that's the story of Detroit. But regional strategies are very good at two things. And one of them is asset building, right? And so when we think about, we need to rethink transportation. We want to have a stadium. We want a new kind of workforce board, this kind of systems restructuring. These kind of regional groups that get together, that have business leadership, have some political leadership, these are very good at that. And so, in full stop, those are what these kind of regional groups are great at, and these regional approaches. City-centered strategies, so the regions are good at hitting, these regional strategies are really kind of good at home runs, maybe even grand slams. What cities are great at is bunt singles, day after day after day, kind of policy, resource allocation, and then this ongoing alignment that seems to me much more critical than it's ever been, which is government at the center of these kind of horizontal alignments between neighborhood groups, business groups, the public sector, and then this vertical alignment, and a lot of talk about this yesterday around how city governments relate to the state and federal governments. You need a certain kind of elected legitimacy to be able to do that. So when I think about this kind of this reframing, I don't think we should be throwing out these regional approaches. I think they're very good at things that these kind of city-led approaches are not very, that these city-led approaches can't do. But I think that these regional strengths are often just kind of a subset of what cities should be doing and can be doing. And so then finally, kind of to bring this back around, one of the interesting things about Detroit's strengths, I think, and Detroit's success, is that it started with this city-focused, city-led economic development that had the political process, the formal channels of government, and the neighborhood associations central to these processes. But one of the things it's done that's so interesting is really reached out to the business community and kind of changed the way that business is done. And Michael talked about some of these examples. It's also, I think, this mayor's office has allowed, kind of the flourishing of multiple sources of power beyond just kind of city power. And so the civic groups, the business groups. And so you ended up with some sort of blending of both of them. But I think had you started with a regional strategy, had Rip given in and said, okay, we're going to do a 5-county Southeast Michigan strategy, I don't think we would be here today. I don't think that's what the outcome would have been. And so when we talk about what the lessons of Detroit are for the national economic development, this is it, right? I mean, the success of Detroit, how it was done, how unconventional it was, I think requires us to kind of rethink some of these foundational questions. So thank you.